Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast.
Yes, indeed.
It's January 31st, 2025, and we are bringing you the top news headlines from across Nigeria and around the world.
Sounds good.
We're pulling insights from sources like Sahara Reporters, Nigerian Tribune, The Guardian, and Vanguard.
Hey.
So buckle up, because we've got a lot to unpack.
Yeah, let's jump right in.
Right.
To the heart of Nigerian politics. We're seeing some serious tension brewing.
Okay.
As former Vice President Atiku Abubakar is publicly criticizing the ongoing trial of activist and frequent government critic Omoyele Sowore.
You're right. This isn't Sowore's first run-in with the authorities. He's been a vocal opponent of several Nigerian administrations. What makes Atiku's criticism particularly interesting is his claim that this trial is part of a broader attempt by the Tinubu administration to silence any dissenting voices.
Yeah, and Atiku is drawing a direct line between this case and the recent targeting of Professor Usman Yusuf, another prominent critic of the government. What's fascinating here is the potential chilling effect this could have on free speech in Nigeria. Is this a sign of a government becoming increasingly intolerant of opposition? Or is there more to this story?
It makes you wonder about the state of democracy in Nigeria and the delicate balance between maintaining order and protecting individual rights. And it's not just former politicians weighing in on this. Rotimi Amechi, the former governor of Rivers State, has made some pretty powerful statements about the nature of power itself.
Yeah, Amechi didn't mince words. He essentially argued that those in power rarely relinquish it willingly. It's up to the citizens, he says, to demand change and hold their leaders accountable. His perspective adds another layer to this whole situation, suggesting that the responsibility for safeguarding democracy ultimately lies with the people.
Switching gears now to some alarming public health news. Lassa fever cases are surging in Nigeria. The NCDC is reporting 39 deaths in just the first 3 weeks of 2025. This isn't just a random occurrence, it's highlighting some critical underlying issues.
Exactly. This outbreak is a stark reminder of the fragility of public health systems, especially in regions with limited resources. The states hardest hit are Edo and Taraba, each reporting 9 deaths, followed by Ondo with 8 and Bauchi with 4. But it's not just about the numbers.
You're right, we need to understand the factors contributing to this outbreak. Is it a lack of awareness? Inadequate sanitation? Limited access to healthcare?
Yeah.
And what does this outbreak tell us about Nigeria's preparedness to handle other infectious diseases, especially in the wake of global health crises we've seen in recent years?
Those are all crucial questions, and for our listeners, it's essential to remember that early detection is key when it comes to Lassa fever.
Right.
Symptoms like fever, headache, muscle aches, and even bleeding can appear anywhere from a few days to 3 weeks after exposure if you experience any of these symptoms, particularly if you've been in areas where Lassa fever is prevalent or have had contact with rodents. Seek medical attention immediately.
And speaking of potential healthcare crises, there's growing concern over possible cuts to U.S. foreign aid for HIV/AIDS programs. This could have a huge impact on Nigeria, which relies heavily on that funding.
Absolutely. Nigeria has the highest number of people living with HIV in West and Central Africa. Any disruption in funding could jeopardize access to treatment and support services for millions of people. It's a complex situation, and we have to consider the ethical implications of reducing aid that directly impacts the lives of vulnerable populations.
The Nigerian government is scrambling to increase local funding to make up for any potential shortfall. But it's a daunting task given existing economic challenges. It really underscores the need for sustainable healthcare funding solutions, not just in Nigeria, but globally.
On a related note, closer to home in Ondo State, nurses have gone on an indefinite strike over ongoing disputes with the government.
This strike stems from the government's alleged failure to honor agreements on wages allowances and promotions. The nurses are arguing that they're being undervalued and overworked, a situation that has been exacerbated by the recent Lassa fever outbreak, which has put immense strain on healthcare workers.
What's concerning here is the potential disruption of healthcare services in the state. If the government and the nurses union can't reach a compromise, it's the patients who will ultimately suffer the situation. Highlights the importance of investing in healthcare infrastructure and ensuring fair treatment and compensation for healthcare workers.
Now let's shift our focus to some international news that has sent shockwaves through religious communities. Bishop John Parambalath of Liverpool has stepped down amidst allegations of sexual assault.
This is a story that raises some serious questions about accountability within religious institutions. While Bishop Parambalath denies the accusations, his resignation speaks volumes. He claims he's stepping down to prevent distractions. But it comes at a time when the Church of England is already facing intense scrutiny over its handling of similar abuse cases.
This resignation comes just shortly after the Archbishop of Canterbury stepped down for mishandling a separate abuse case. It paints a picture of an institution grappling with a crisis of trust and accountability. The question now is, will this lead to meaningful reforms and a genuine commitment to addressing these issues? Or will it be brushed under the rug?
It's a pivotal moment for the Church of England the world is watching to see how they respond to this crisis and whether they will prioritize transparency and justice.
Moving now to a truly shocking story from Pakistan. A teenage girl has been killed by her own father, who reportedly disapproved of her TikTok videos.
This is a tragedy that has sparked outrage and horror around the world while the details are still emerging. Initial reports suggest that the girl's father, who had recently moved his family back to Pakistan from the US, was enraged by his daughter's online activity. This case is prompting a much-needed conversation about the dangers of cultural extremism and the urgent need to protect women's rights, particularly in societies where they're often viewed as subordinate.
It's a heartbreaking reminder that violence against women takes many forms, and it often stems from deeply ingrained cultural beliefs and power imbalances. This case also raises questions about the role of social media in exacerbating these issues.
It's a complex and multifaceted problem with no easy answers. But one thing is clear, we need to challenge harmful cultural norms, promote gender equality, and ensure that women and girls are safe and empowered to express themselves freely both online and offline.
And finally, we're seeing escalating political tensions between Rwanda and South Africa stemming from the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
This is a situation with the potential to destabilize the entire region. Rwandan President Paul Kagame has issued a stern warning to South Africa, rejecting claims that Rwandan forces are responsible for the deaths of South African soldiers. In the DRC, Kagame's words were incredibly strong, accusing the South African mission in the DRC of being a belligerent force rather than a peacekeeping one.
He even went so far as to say that if South Africa wants a confrontation, Rwanda is ready for it. These are fighting words, and they reflect the deep mistrust and animosity that has been simmering between the two nations.
The conflict in the DRC has become a proxy war, with various regional powers backing different factions. This latest escalation highlights the complexity of the situation and the challenges of finding a peaceful resolution. Yeah, it's a tangled web of alliances and rivalries, and it's a situation that requires careful diplomacy and a commitment to dialogue if there's any hope of de-escalation.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from political turmoil in Nigeria to public health emergencies and international conflicts. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of news.
Yeah.
But what I find fascinating is how these seemingly disparate stories are actually interconnected.
You're absolutely right. There's a common thread running through many of these headlines: the struggle for power, the demand for accountability, and the fight for justice. Whether it's Atiku challenging the government's actions, nurses demanding fair treatment, or Bishop Parumbalath stepping down amidst scandal, people are raising their voices and demanding to be heard.
It's a reminder that even in the face of global crises and political maneuvering, individual stories and acts of courage can make a difference. It makes you wonder, what can ordinary people do to create positive change in a world that often feels chaotic and out of control?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves. I think it starts with staying informed and engaged. Don't just passively consume the news, critically analyze it, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and seek out diverse perspectives. And then most importantly, take action, support organizations that align with your values, contact your representatives, and engage in meaningful conversations with your friends and family. Every voice matters.
Speaking of action, the nurses strike in Ondo State is a powerful example of people standing up for their rights. They're putting their livelihoods on the line to demand better working conditions and fair treatment. It's a reminder that change rarely comes without sacrifice.
And their struggle is a microcosm of a larger issue: the undervaluing and underfunding of healthcare systems worldwide. The pandemic exposed the fragility of these systems, and now we're seeing the consequences. The Lassa fever outbreak in Nigeria, the potential cuts to HIV/AIDS funding, the nurses' strike. These are all symptoms of a deeper problem.
You've hit on a crucial point. These stories are not just isolated incidents. They're interconnected and reflect broader systemic issues. Take the tragic case of the teenage girl killed in Pakistan for her TikTok videos. It's a horrific reminder of the dangers women face in certain parts of the world, but it also raises questions about the role of social media in our lives.
It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, social media can be a powerful tool for connection, expression, and activism. On the other hand, it can be a breeding ground for hate, misinformation, and violence. We need to be having serious conversations about online safety, digital literacy and the ethical responsibilities of social media platforms.
It's about finding that balance between freedom of expression and protecting vulnerable populations from harm. And this brings us back to the theme of accountability. Who is responsible for ensuring that online spaces are safe and that women and girls are protected from violence both online and offline?
It's a shared responsibility. Are the governments, social media companies, communities, individuals, we all have a role to play. We need to challenge harmful cultural norms, promote gender equality, and create a culture of respect and empathy. It's a long and difficult process, but it's essential if we want to create a more just and equitable world.
And speaking of accountability, the ongoing tensions between Rwanda and South Africa highlight the complexities of international relations and the challenges of resolving conflicts in regions with a long history of violence.
The situation in the DRC is a prime example. It's the conflict fueled by a complex web of historical grievances, political rivalries, and economic interests. Finding a lasting peace will require all parties to come to the table in good faith, willing to compromise and prioritize the needs of the Congolese people over their own agendas.
It's a reminder that peace is not just the absence of war. It's the presence of justice, equality, and opportunity. And that requires a commitment to addressing the root causes of conflict, not just the symptoms.
Absolutely. We need to move beyond short-term solutions and focus on long-term strategies that promote sustainable peace and development. This involves investing in education, healthcare infrastructure, and good governance. It also requires addressing issues like poverty, inequality, and corruption, which often fuel conflict and instability.
The news can often feel like a relentless barrage of negativity, but it's important to remember that there are also stories of hope and resilience. People are working tirelessly to make a difference, whether it's healthcare workers on the front lines of the Lassa fever outbreak, activists fighting for women's rights in Pakistan, or diplomats working to de-escalate tensions between Rwanda and South Africa.
Those stories don't always make headlines, but they are happening every day all around the world. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of global challenges, but it's important to remember that every action, no matter how small, can contribute to positive change.
You're right, we can choose to be overwhelmed by the negativity, or we can choose to be inspired by the countless individuals and organizations working to create a better world. It's about focusing on what we can control, using our voices to advocate for change, and supporting those who are making a difference.
And I think that's a powerful message for our listeners to take away from today's exploration of the news.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about the importance of staying informed and engaged. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture. So I want to ask you, what are some key takeaways from today's news that you think our listeners should really reflect on?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important takeaways is the interconnectedness of everything. The issues we've discussed today, from political tensions to public health crises to international conflicts, are not isolated incidents. They are all part of a complex web of interconnected systems. Understanding these connections is crucial if we want to find effective solutions. Yeah, it's like that saying, the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil can set off a tornado in Texas. Everything is connected, and our actions, no matter how small, can have ripple effects that we may never fully comprehend.
Exactly. Another key takeaway is the importance of critical thinking. We are bombarded with information from all directions these days, and it's more important than ever to be discerning consumers of news. Don't just accept everything you read or hear at face value. Question sources, consider biases, and seek out diverse perspectives.
Yeah, it's about developing that healthy skepticism and not letting ourselves be swayed by emotional appeals or manipulative tactics. We need to be active participants in the information landscape, not passive recipients. And finally, I think the most important takeaway of all is the power of hope.
Okay.
The world can feel like a very dark place at times, but there are countless individuals and organizations working tirelessly to make it a better place. We need to celebrate their efforts, support their work, and never lose sight of the possibility of positive change.
That's a beautiful sentiment, and I think it's the perfect note to end on as we wrap up our exploration of today's headlines. I want to leave our listeners with the thought-provoking question. We've talked about power dynamics, accountability, and the struggle for justice, but what does justice truly look like in a world as complex and interconnected as ours?
That's a profound question, and one that deserves deep reflection. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, where basic human rights are protected, and where power is distributed equitably. It's an ongoing process, a constant striving towards a more just and compassionate world.
And it's a journey we must all embark on together. It starts with individual actions, with speaking up against injustice, with holding those in power accountable, and with supporting those who are marginalized and oppressed.
Yeah, it's about recognizing our interconnectedness, understanding that our actions have consequences, and striving to create a world where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through today's headlines. We hope this exploration has sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and inspired you to engage with the world around you.
It's been a privilege to share these insights with you, and remember, even amidst the chaos and uncertainty, there is always hope. There are always people working to make a difference, and you can be one of them.
Thank you for listening to the Today's Top News Headlines on IMC Radio and Podcast.